Jana Balaba Giridhari Suranandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasuranandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Balaba Giridhari Yasudanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasudanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopijana Balaba Giridhari Gopijana Balaba Giridhari Yasudanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yasudanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada, Jaya Prabhupada. Paramahansa Paribhajikacharya Sodara Sarashi Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Never. Vai, as a matter of fact. Nibihi, by any man. Naradevam, unto a man god. Pada Akyam, who is transcendental. Samatum, place on equal footing. Arhasi, by the prowess. Abhipakva, unripe or immature. Bude, intelligence. Yet, of whom? Tejasa, by the prowess. Durvishahena, unsurpassable. Guptaha, protected. Vindanti, enjoys. Badrani, all prosperity. Akutabhayaha, completely defended. Prajaha, the subjects. Translation. O my boy, your intelligence is immature, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king, who is the best amongst human beings, is as good as the personality of Godhead. He is never to be placed on an equal footing with common men. The citizens of the state live in prosperity, being protected by his unsurpassable prowess. O my boy, repeat, O my boy, your intelligence is immature, and therefore you have no knowledge that the king, who is the best amongst human beings, is as good as the personality of Godhead. He is never to be placed on an equal footing with common men. The citizens of the state live in prosperity, being protected by his insurpassable prowess. Text 43. I'll just read through the Sanskrit and we won't repeat it because it's getting to be a bit long. Alakshamane Naradeva Namni Vatangapanava Yamangalokaha Tadat Hicharo Prachuro Vinankyati Arakshamano Vivaryu Tavat Arakshamano Vivaru Tavat Shanat Akshamane, repeat, Akshamane, being abolished. Naradeva, monarchical. Namni, of the name. Rata Angapano, the representative of the Lord. I am this. Anga, oh my boy. Lokaha, this world. Tadahi, at once. Aura, chaura, thieves. Prachura, too much. Vinankyati, vanquishes. Arakshamana, being not protected. Avivartavat, like lambs. Shanat, at once. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. My dear boy, the Lord who carries the wheel of the chariot is represented by the monarchical regime. And when this regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves. And then, at once, who then, at once vanquish the unprotected subjects like scattered lambs. My dear boy, repeat, my dear boy, the Lord who carries the wheel of a chariot is represented by the monarchical regime. And when this regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves, who then at once vanquish the unprotected subjects like scattered lambs. Purport. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, the monarchical regime represents the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead. The king is said to be the representative of the absolute personality of Godhead because he is trained to acquire the qualities of God to protect the living beings. The battle of Kurukshetra was planned by the Lord to establish the real representative of the Lord, Maharaj Yudhisthira. An ideal king, thoroughly trained by culture and devotional service with the martial spirit, makes a perfect king. Such a personal monarchy is far better than the so-called democracy of no training and responsibility. The thieves and rogues of the modern democracy seek election by misrepresentation of votes, and the successful rogues and thieves devour the mass of population. One trained monarch is far better than hundreds of useless ministerial rogues, and it is hinted herein that by abolition of a monarchical regime, that of Maharaj Pariksit, the mass of people become open to many attacks of the age of Kali. They are never happy in an overly advertised form of democracy. The result of such a kingless administration is described in the following verses. So the verse again, my dear boy, the Lord who carries the wheel of a chariot is represented by the monarchical regime. And when this regime is abolished, the whole world becomes filled with thieves. And then, who then at once vanquish the unprotected subjects like scattered lambs. Ukam karoti bachalam pangam langayate gidim yatkrit pataraham bande Shri Guru dinatarane. This purport makes me think of when King Venu, a very cruel ruler, was in power. There was very little crime because people were afraid of his draconian rule. It's said that there was a big dust cloud made by the rogues and thieves when after his death, when there was no king. So a king has a very prominent position. In British history, there's something called the Sword of Mercy, and when a person was condemned to death, if he happened to break away from his executor, and touched what was called the Sword of Mercy, he was able to be excused from being executed. So even though these leaders today are very much rogues, as Prabhupada mentions, they're given a lot of respect because, as it is said, as Lord Chaitanya has taught us, Trinadapi Sunichana, we offer respect to all people, even the great rulers. When governors or people who were very prominent in Indian politics came to temples, they were treated very, very royally by Srila Prabhupada, even though they were meat eaters and fornicators and all sorts of bad things. It's kind of a mixture of good and bad. According to Srimad Bhagavatam, Srimad Ujjitamevava, one who has all glorious and wonderful and things are actually representatives of Krishna. And if a person is a leader, even though he be a Muslim or an American, speaking of low-class people, he's honored very much. Just like the president of the United States, I remember when Clinton was the president, he supported abortion. He allowed a certain chemical or something to come in through the back door to make abortion illegal when it was illegal in many cases. So although he was very liberal in a lot of ways, he was very much a rogue in a lot of other ways. So there's always a mixture, and according to what Prabhupada has said here, personal monarchy is far better than so-called democracy of no training and responsibility. So he does make a distinction between an autocracy or a monarchy and a democracy. Some German philosophers used to, and it started actually with Plato, who said that there's a certain cyclical thing that happens in the material world, like a democracy turns into an oligarchy, it turns into a monarchy, it turns into something else, and it becomes a tyranny, and then it becomes a democracy again. And so throughout the history of the world, monarchies are generally abolished, and people have, like in the United States, have opted for a sort of committee or government by the people, as they call it. Karl Marx was a very much of a ne'er-do-well, obscure German philosopher, Marx. He wrote the Communist Manifesto, and years after his death, this Communist Manifesto became the way of life for almost 70 years for about 400 million people under the Bolshevik regime of Joseph Stalin. But Prabhupada didn't like it, not just because he came to America and liked America, but because it was very atheistic. The communist philosophy was that the state is the absolute ruler, is the ultimate managing authority, and that God doesn't exist. There was even a time, I read about this, when the people of the former Soviet Union, when it was the former Soviet Union, when it was the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, used to have a committee, and tourists could sit in the audience and ask this committee all kinds of questions. This committee professed atheism, and it had a lot of logical sort of proofs, as it were, that atheism is true. And so there was always a very sort of healthy, quote-unquote, debate going on between atheism and theism. And the Bolshevik regime thought it was such an important thing to intellectually ascertain that atheism was true, was the real essence, that the tourists who came from countries that were theistic were given the right to debate these theoreticians of atheism for many years. So it was not only a political way of life of repression, but it was a philosophical treatise that was followed very, very resolutely by the people of the former Soviet Union. Of course, it only lasted for a certain amount of time. I was told that Prabhupada predicted the downfall of this regime when he visited Russia, that he said that you can't repress people forever. And that was his notion, that it would eventually be a rebellion. And almost exactly to the time that he said it would happen, it happened. There was a revolution, and this autocracy or tyranny sort of became a type of democracy. It's not really a democracy. There's still a lot of tyranny going on, but it's changed a lot. When I first visited the former Soviet Union, I was amazed that in the undergrounds that there were no advertisements. It was just blank, and so I took out my camera, I took pictures, and I took some pictures of people sitting in the trains, and they didn't object to being photographed. They were just trained to be very submissive and obedient to the ruling powers. And so if someone came out with a camera, was taking a picture, hey, no problem. But if you do that in this country, or in the United States or in England, people just want to know everything about it, and they want to have the right to disappear, or for you not to take their picture. So it's very different. Anyway, these political different kinds of political regimes, they do cycle, they change. And America's going through a lot of difficulties right now. There's a lot of so-called freedom, but there's, in the name of freedom, there's race riots and all kinds of protests going on over the way that the government is handling the COVID-19 problem and many other things. And there's a lot of people that dislike the regime. And so the votes are kind of like difficult. The first time I visited Peru, there was a terrorist group. They were very violent. They were called the Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path, Sendero Luminosos. And they were responsible, from what I read, for approximately 20,000 deaths. People of their own, in their own group, and police and ordinary citizens. And when I first arrived, it was dark. And on the way to where I was staying from the airport, we were stopped about 3 or 4 times by policemen with machine guns. And I asked the drivers, what is going on here? And they told me about this terrorist group, that they were very violent, and in order to stem the violence, any visitors from a foreign country were examined very carefully. And these people with machine guns wanted to see all our papers and wanted to know that we were bona fide and so on and so forth. And so this was going on in the early 80s. They eventually caught up with the leader of this terrorist group and abolished them. But they were extremely violent. And they one time, just before I arrived, they had blown off a bomb on the 7th floor of an apartment building. And it was such a powerful bomb that the temple restaurant, which was about 2 or 3 blocks away, was shaken, and the plate glass window was broken in front of it. They were very, 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 very violent. But they were followers of Karl Marx. They thought that this is the way to be. This is the future of the Peruvian government. And eventually it was that they were rounded up and returned to sort of a democracy of sorts. One of the first times I lectured, gave a class in Lima, someone asked me at the end of my class, "What do you think of communism?" And I kind of knew that it was a bit of a loaded question, because I knew that there was a very strong communist element in the city and throughout the country. So I tried to give a sort of politically correct, is that the right term, answer, and said that something like Prabhupada said, that it didn't, whether it was democratic or autocratic or monarchical, if there's no God in the picture, then it's just a useless thing. And I think Prabhupada liked the United States, because even though it's fraught with a lot of difficulties, and he sometimes called it demon crazy instead of democracy, demon crazy, he liked it because it was there was a lot of piety. I mean, sort of, we might call it sort of incorrect or incomplete piety. A lot of churches and that sort of thing. But in a conversation in 1977, I think Srimad Damodar was present, and I think there were a few other devotees, just a couple of them. But he was saying that Srimad Damodar mentioned that he got a scholarship. The late Srimad Damodar mentioned that he got a scholarship, and in this, when he was interviewed, he was given the right, he said, to go to any part of the world that he wanted to go to. And he said that he told them that he wanted to go to the United States because he felt that people were more open-minded there. And he said but a lot of people that got scholarships wanted to go to England, because England had been a former ruler of India. And he said there was an Englishman present who he thought he was a little bit offended that he didn't choose his country. But he really liked the United States. And Prabhupada said, yes, that was my idea too. I wanted to go to the United States. I could have gone to London, but I thought, well, go to New York, because the people in that country are more powerful, and people they copy them. They speak their language. They have a lot of military strength, they have a lot of money, they have a lot of wealth, they have a lot of, in a sense, a lot of good karma, we might say, temporarily anyway. So Prabhupada made a little joke, and he said, that's why I say that America is my fatherland, and India is my motherland. That was his joke. America is my fatherland. And he went on to say why he liked it and why he was very. At first, he was kind of like very about the future of these people, because they were very much, and we read in the poems about how he thought that the people were all very much engrossed in sense gratification, which is the case. I'm in one of them. And they have a lot to answer for, the Americans. But he liked it because people gradually started to take up Krishna consciousness, even from a very by standards that he was used to, by very low births, and that's how things got started. And when he was read a judgment by an appeal court judge in Queens, New York, that exonerated the Hare Krishnas from brainwashing very, very strongly. It was a very strong statement. It made several pages, and it was read aloud to Prabhupada. It appeared on the first page of the Times of India, first in the New York Times, and then the next day in the Times of India. And after hearing it read to him, Prabhupada said this was kind of the turning point in the sort of deprogramming movement. I don't know when it was. It was in 1977, actually. Prabhupada said, "Now my mission is successful." It wasn't the end of the deprogramming movement, but it was a turning point in the deprogramming movement. A turning point when people had to realize that there was something very, very useful, very ancient, very authentic about Krishna consciousness. During this conversation in 1977 in March, just before the thing was read to him, or right after it was read to him, someone opined that now that this judgment has been written, people are feeling the weight of the Hare Krishna movement. And Prabhupada, at that time, talked about the demon called Trinivarta, the whirlwind demon, who lifted Krishna. But after he raised Krishna up into the upper part of the atmosphere, he realized that he was very heavy, and he fell to his death, the demon, because Krishna became very heavy. So Prabhupada used that term "heavy" to explain that Krishna is always victorious. It's said in the Bhagavad Gita in the end of in the 18th chapter, wherever there is Krishna, there is always victory. So he kind of knew that. I mean, he had a faith that the Krishna consciousness movement was going to be victorious over the anti-Krishna movement, the deprogramming movement. Even they were very organized. They had meetings, sometimes with hundreds of people, and they kidnapped people. They did all sorts of illegal things. And Prabhupada, throughout all these reports, he wasn't present in the United States when most of this was going on, but he also felt, and he said many times that it's just a temporary phenomenon, and we're going to overcome this obstacle, and it happened. And he said, even if it takes 7 years, if you're summoned into court, take all the books that I've written and ask the judge to read the books. He said, this is our philosophy. And he said that this may take 10 years or 7 years or something like that. But after this judgment was read, he said, I think that what was supposed to take 7 years took place, it happened in 1 year. And he was very amazed that this is a very strong statement about the Hare Krishna movement being a bona fide religion with roots in India going back thousands of years. And it was a very strong statement. It was when its deprogramming movement was kind of, almost reaching an apex in the East Coast. But it continued for a while, but they lost a lot of credibility, and the whole thing was eventually abolished. But Prabhupada liked the United States because it was theistic, and he didn't like communism, not because it was the enemy of the United States, but because it was atheistic, and very strongly atheistic. He didn't like that at all, and he even said as much. But here, and throughout his career, devotional career on this planet, he talked about the fallacies of the different political regimes, whether it's monarchy, autocracy, tyranny, oligarchy, or whatever. That without an ideal person, actually everyone wants an ideal person. In the days before the Kali Yuga began, the kings were saintly. They were Raja Rishis. The people felt protected. They felt that they could consult with them. They felt secure. There was an incident when Prabhupada was in the United States. I think it was in 1976. It was in 1967. Indira Gandhi got stoned because farmers, it happened in Mumbai, she was in Mumbai, and it happened because there was very little rain that year. There was almost a drought. And this person burst into Prabhupada's room with a newspaper and threw it down on Prabhupada's desk and said, "Just see, they've stoned your prime minister." And he thought that Prabhupada was going to react in a way that he was going to be horrified that his own prime minister was stoned. But instead, he just smiled and said, "Oh, very good." And then he proceeded to say how these kind of innocent village farmer type people were blaming their leader for no rain. They depended on everything. Everything depended on the leader. The weather, the protesters, the violence and everything. They felt protected, and if anything went wrong, it was the leader's fault. They were that much dependent upon the leader's leadership. But at the beginning, as we're reading here, as Kali Yuga appeared, and as I think Prabhupada or someone mentioned, I think Banu Maharaj mentioned, that this fact that the Brahmin cursing the king was a significant gesture, because it signified the downfall of the Brahminical nature. And the advent of Kali Yuga, that the Brahmins could sink to such a low thing as to vilify a great leader, a great Rajarishi, who Parikshit was born as, but he was the last of his genre, you might say. So this Kali Yuga is a very difficult age, and as we see, there are many different permutations and combinations of different regimes that come and go, and they're all, because they're all godless, the people are feeling unprotected, and there's a chaotic situation that exists everywhere, because even in this country, I mean, it's better than most countries, but it's a chaotic situation because people don't trust the government. I've noticed that people in general are very friendly in this country, but at the same time they have a kind of chip on their shoulder against the leaders, and I can sort of understand that because they tend to do some pretty awful things sometimes, in their personal lives anyway. Although they're in a sense they're doing a good thing by protecting the citizens from viruses. That's probably one of the better things that's going on. But Prabhupada, even when leaders were Mohammedans or whatever they were treated with a great deal of respect, because they were thought to have the position that they had because of their piety and maybe in a past life, or somehow they were given that position by Krishna. And it's confirmed in the Bhagavad Gita that people of anything that's great and wonderful and majestic is to be understood to be an arrangement by Krishna. Just like this arrangement was very unusual, that Maharaj Parikshit became hungry and thirsty, that a Rajarishi and a Kshatriya succumbed to thirst and to insulting a great Rishi. All these things were, as explained, arranged by Krishna to happen, to make everyone understand that this is the beginning of the age of Kali. So I think we'll stop there if there's any comment or questions or clarifications. Oh, I wanted to say that I saw part of Ramai Maharaj's address to the devotees about reading, how important reading is, and I think Prabhupada's, one of the quotes, I think that was a very good address that you made. One of the quotes from Prabhupada was that if we don't read on a regular basis, we'll eventually fall down and succumb to sense gratification. So reading is very, very important. And that was the message, that if we don't read regularly, Prabhupada's message, we will be attracted by Maya. There's always a great a war going on between the atheist and the theist, and the atheist in the form of Maya is always trying to attract us. And if we don't fortify our existence by reading regularly Prabhupada's books, we'll become weak and subjected to the attraction, the allurements of Maya, which are everywhere and very, very powerful. But we have to fight fire with fire, as it's said, and that fire, that strength is in the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. that there is such a thing as transmigration of the soul, and there's such a thing as good and bad mixed together. Like in this present age, there's good things and there's bad things, and so Prabhupada called it the science of God. Science comes from, I think, a Greek or Latin word, S-C-I-R-E. I don't know how it's pronounced, but the idea is that it's knowledge. It meant knowledge, wisdom, and now it just means technology, basically. There was a time when Prabhupada first came to America, when he was lecturing at Berkeley. And it was a very dark room. I think I wrote about this in one of my Vyasa Puja offerings, and we couldn't tell. He asked if there were any questions after his lecture, and the person who asked obviously had an accent that betrayed that person was from that part of the world that Prabhupada came from, and Prabhupada immediately recognized it, and he kind of knew that person was coming to learn technology. And the question was, well, I've come to learn technology. I'm going to go back to where I came from, and I'm going to better the lifestyle. And Prabhupada's response was, you are a beggar. I am a giver. You've come to this country to partake in the supermarket of the United States, all the good things, and you think you're going to bring it back and make life better in the United States. I am a giver. I've come to give everything that's worthwhile from my land to the Americans, because they need it. And you are doing just the opposite. So, and then there was silence, which rang out in the big darkened hall. It rang out, and there was no comeback, because it was the perfect rejoinder, I thought. And even though the devotees were snickering, which was probably a little bit wrong, Prabhupada gave the right answer. Any other points? Okay, I think we'll stop then. Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.